we know that we're in football season. People are excited about that, and it has raised a lot of interesting stories, including comments Trump has made very recently, and caused us to wonder, is there anything, Mark, Trump will not cheat at?
Commander-in-Chief.
From what I've read and what I understand, first of all, no. He cheats at golf, but nobody will call him on it. But also, when he talks negatively about the NFL, that is a stretch. Realize that in the early 1980s, some business owners got together and decided that they would launch a football league, a professional football league to play in the spring. The idea, the business model, was that they'd be able to play in the spring. They'd have professional football. All those fans that would love to watch football year round would be able to watch it in the spring, and they wouldn't have to worry about competing with the NFL, because the NFL went through the whole thing of the American Football League and the National Football League competing against each other. Then they merged in the 1970s. So Trump bought a franchise, the New Jersey Generals. And from the very start, he said, we've got to go in competition with the NFL. We have to have fall football. This is what we have to do. Now, there was a documentary done on it a couple of years ago called Small Potatoes, because what eventually happened was Trump took over the USFL. As soon as he did, they suspended play for that spring and set a schedule for the fall, and then sued the NFL for unfair competition in the fall. They had a big trial under the antitrust laws, the kind of laws that Trump says are really bad for business. And he sued the NFL without any of the teams in the NFL or the USFL having played a down in the fall. The jury heard the evidence and awarded him $1. And under the statute, that it trebled. So that meant he got $3. And so at the end of the documentary, the reporter says, well, by the way, Mr. Trump, would you like to see the damages you got? Here's the check for like $3 and some odd cents. And Trump takes the microphone off and he goes, sometime I'll tell you the real story about the USFL. This is all small potatoes. Wow. His business plan is build it up, do a lot of flash, and then he can't run things. So he trashes it. He files bankruptcy. He never played football. He played basketball. He ran track. I think he played tennis. He might have played lacrosse. He never played football. So when he said yesterday and trashed players by saying,
what did he say?
He said that well, you hit somebody hard and they throw a flag. I mean, they're taking all the point out of the game. That's what people watch for. All these players are suffering concussions from when they're playing Pop Warner, when they're little kids and they're getting hit. It's when you're concussed, it's not just a major concussion that causes brain damage long term. It's also the minor concussions that occur every play on the field. And this idiot is calling out people who are suffering injuries, and the league for finally acting responsibly and trying to address it and calling them wimps. And then he turns around and says that Colin Kaepernick, any other players who are expressing that are protesting the Star Spangled Banner at the beginning of the game, which, why do you play the national anthem at the beginning of a sports event anyway? Mike Royko wrote about that years ago. Well, Kaepernick was upset because the third verse of the national anthem, and Francis Scott Key, who wrote the national anthem, was a racist. I mean, he really supported slavery.
You need to put it out.
And so the third verse is, and where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more. Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave, or the land of the free and the home of the brave. And unless you happen to be someone held in slavery at that time.
Mark, your audio is cutting out. You have to do something with your audio.
Okay. So Colin Kaepernick was expressing protest by kneeling, not disrupting anything, but kneeling during the Star-Spangled Banner. Freedom is what our country is about. So all this stuff that Trump said about the NFL is hypocritical, idiotic, and contrary to what our country is about.
And you're a sports fan, I will say. Now, I do want to make one comment. I'm a Pats fan, but I'm wondering this morning what Bill Belichick and Tom Brady are thinking for their part in helping to encourage people to vote for Donald Trump. I know that Gisele Bündchen had a lot to say about it with Tom, so maybe he's, had a change of heart, but really should think about the consequences of people knowing what a monster this, to me, not a person, but this being is, and have voted for him for whatever other selfish reasons. But anyway, the reason we're here today is not to talk about football, and it's not even to talk about Donald Trump per se. It's to talk about the fact that we were cheated out of a fair and free election, and the result therefore was gained by cheating. And we're trying to address that as citizens. And you, Mark, as the lead counsel for 12 brave petitioners who are at the door of the Supreme Court suing, are going to be considered on Monday, September 25th. So I just read this shocking blog post written by you this morning where you make a quite a bold assertion that half the case in 16-1464 has been proven, that a special master should be appointed. So what does that mean? Half of our case has been proven. What does that mean?
Okay. A 1976 court case, Donahue versus Board of Elections of New York, ruled on a challenge to the presidential election that year in New York of the selection of the electors that went to the Electoral College. And so there has been a case that has ruled that the federal courts have the authority under their equitable jurisdiction to nullify the results of an election. Now, in that case, Chief Judge Mish, I believe, was the person who wrote the opinion. Chief Judge Mish wrote, in order to establish that an election should be nullified, when he talked about state elections, and under state elections, two prongs aren't relevant to what we're talking about in a federal election. And so under a federal election, there are two prongs you have to prove. One is that there was illegal intentional conduct. In other words, somebody interfered in the election. And the other is that those acts of interference affected the outcome or the results of the election. Now, first, we've established the interference. If we go back to the 17 intelligence agencies, remember that? They reported that there was Russian interference, but that was adopted by an act of Congress in August of this year as one of the findings of Congress in the United States Adversary Act. They wanted to spell out what it was that they were upset about with Russia. So those results were adopted. Donald Trump, Paul Ryan, Mike Pence are all named as parties in the action that's pending before the U.S. Supreme Court right now, docket number 16-1464. As parties to an action, admissions they make have evidentiary value. And so when Paul Ryan said there's no question that the Russians interfered with the election, Trump a couple of times said, okay, fine, they interfered with the election. Of course, and he contradicted himself. Then Pence said, well, I think that we've seen that the Russians have interfered with the election. So you have admissions from parties to the case. You have Congress saying it, and you have the U.S. intelligence agencies establishing it.
Well, and the president said the election was fraudulent. He said it for different reasons, to throw shade and distract. But even Donald Trump, for different reasons, has said the election was fraudulent. There were illegal people voting elections. So he has said the election was fraudulent.
So we've established the first prong that has to be established to challenge or nullify an election. The second part is that we have to establish that the interference had an effect. Now, the point that I made this morning in the blog is we are asking that the Supreme Court, under Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 53, appoint a special master to conduct what would be truly an independent investigation of Russian interference in our election. And that would be independent, because the special counsel, Mr. Mueller, who is doing a job very, very well, is still part of the executive branch. Trump could order the deputy attorney general to fire Mr. Mueller at any time. Then we'd be back to square one in terms of any kind of an investigation. Congress is not going to order any kind of an investigation. When Department of Homeland Security came out yesterday and said, well, okay, there's been interference, but we didn't find any effects on the election, that's the executive branch making that statement. The judicial branch, according to James Madison in Federalist Paper 43, I believe it was, said that the judicial branch is the best branch to conduct some kind of an investigation and dispute between the branches of government. And so we're asking that a special master be named. That would be somebody acting within the judicial branch, would not be subject to control or firing or anything by Donald Trump or Congress. And we could see and ascertain, look, if we've established now that Russia acted to interfere in our election, and we have all these anomalies that have occurred that we haven't had a challenge to an election like this since 1876, I believe. And that would have been Rutherford B. Hayes being elected over Tilden. So
Hang on.
I have a question too.
so we need an investigation. We need to be independent. Go ahead.
No, I have a question.
Wait, just one second, Amy. We saw the fiery, passionate Mark, but Mark, Amy has a question for you, okay? Because we're not sure. You're passionate, you're fiery, but how solid is this? Amy, do you have a question?
I have two questions. I'm sure they're related and you can put them together. One is that we hear from people all the time, oh, there's no evidence. I consider that a talking point, and perhaps you could address that. Why are people thinking there's no evidence? And then also, what does table of authorities mean in the case? Explain that, please.
Okay, let me do that second question first. That means that the table of authorities is the list of court cases, statutes, federal rules of procedure upon which we rely in the petition for writ of mandamus and for appointment of special master. In terms of the first part, where people say that there's no evidence, I mean, I think we had a graphic the other day showing the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where he says, Arthur hacks off his arm and he goes, let me pass, and the Black Knight goes, no one shall pass. He goes, I just hacked off your bloody arm. And he said, no, you didn't. It's only a flesh wound. I mean, so you have people denying what is on there every day. A good example being the person who supported Trump, and John Cleese, ironically, from Monty Python was referring to this. And he said, she supported Trump, and he apologized to a British audience for something that Trump said. That's pretty outrageous. He said, I'm not going to use the word that Trump used, but he said, I asked the woman, didn't you hear him say that as a celebrity, he could grab a woman and they expected that? And the woman said, well, he didn't know he was being recorded.
Yeah. Speaking of women and powerful women, Kirsten, do you want to comment on what we're expecting this morning on TV on Joy Reid?
Oh, yeah. Well, AM Joy, which is a show that I love, and I'm looking right now, they're talking about Facebook's being used as a weapon for stealing the election. But AM Joy, which I'm going to be typing up here now in a second, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is supposed to be on, and we would really like to encourage people to tweet to her. Well, it says Saturday 10 a.m. Evidently that's being delayed, or maybe she was already on, but we want people to tweet here to Hillary Clinton and to Joy Reid and say, have you read the case? Mm-hmm. Have you heard the case? I mean, did you know we have 4.5 pages of authorities that Mark has painstakingly included to support an abundance of arguments. Basically, Mark, how many different arguments are you making? We know Article 4, Section 4, the big guarantee clause that basically Professor Tribe and others says is no guarantee. And then we have, sorry, what other articles and sections and arguments are you making here to support your case, just in general?
First of all, the foundation for the case is Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution that provides that the federal courts and the Supreme Court specifically here.
Start again, we can't hear you. Get nearer to the mics.
Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution confers equitable jurisdiction on the federal courts. And John Marshall wrote in Marbury versus Madison, one of the early cases in our country's history, that where an injustice exists and the Constitution doesn't otherwise specifically address it, the court will fashion a remedy to address that injustice. Ours is a system of law that was derived from English common law. And so in such instances, it is consistent with our legal heritage to address instances where the Constitution doesn't specifically address something. The Constitution, like I pointed out the other day, here's my copy by the Cato Institute. It's the Koch brothers. I'd like to thank them both for that.
I got my copy from the local Republicans too, by the way.
Well, if it says Cato on the back, that's not referring to the Green Hornets driver. But when you look at the Constitution, not everything for a government that's necessary is listed in the Constitution. That's why the people at the convention in 1787 referred to themselves as framers. They were building a structure, a framework for a government. So those things not specifically enumerated in there that are necessary for the federal government are things that can be presumed. What Donahue versus Board of Elections, 1976 case from New York said, nobody would think that an election could be stolen with illegal balloting or illegal voters, and the federal courts have the equitable jurisdiction to declare such an election void. Not only can they do it for just the election in New York for president, those votes, but they could do it for the entire nation. So we have that as a basis. We also allege that the illegality occurred in the form of collusion with a hostile foreign government that amounts to treason, that there was fraud perpetrated upon the United States, upon voters in the United States, and it's fraud in this way. Unless somebody was voting for a person for president whom they knew was going to be a puppet of Russia, then if Russia was able to flip those votes sufficiently, and it didn't take that very many, then everybody lost the right to vote except maybe Trump family members, a couple of hundred people who were in on this or knew about it, and they voted for a Russian puppet. Otherwise, everybody lost their right to vote. So we have that in there as a basis. And those are the important points, and that's why we need to at least have a special master appointed to investigate whether indeed all this interference had an effect. And I really doubt, and you've heard me say this before, that Vladimir Putin would have invested that much money, that much time, and that much effort into something and had it go for naught.
Mark, do you think we even have a clue how much actual money was invested from Russia?
I do not know. That would be something that you'd probably have to ask Vladimir Putin's accountant, which maybe that job is vacated by the week. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be his accountant. It's like, no, I mean, because his finances have kind of been spiraling down lately. I wouldn't want to have to give Vladimir Putin bad news. Like,
well, speaking of investing, I know a lot of people watching this are wondering how can they get involved. And
so,
what
Mark, you sit back now because you're the attorney. You're not allowed to talk about these things. So you just be quiet for a second here. Okay. Amy and I, thank you, Amy. We're personally appealing now. This is a good place to stop because I do want to encourage everyone to tweet to Hillary Clinton, Joanne Reed, Scott Dworkin of the Democratic Coalition for Justice, or against Trump, sorry, Democratic Coalition Against Trump, to read the case, to encourage the Supreme Court to hear the case, to understand it's based on the Constitution. And what we want them to do is make a remedy. Right. If there is no remedy, make one. That's your job. So to help us with this and to afford the legal expenses, we are asking everyone to donate to, and we have a Crowd Justice site, crowdjustice.com/hearthecase. Will take you right to the page. We're doing $1,000 increments for starters, just to get our feet wet, figure out how to do this crowdfunding thing. We're almost halfway there. We're off to a great start.
Just in the first 3 days, we've had people contribute small amounts that have gotten us almost a third, well, more than a third of the way to our initial goal, just to keep this site up, because we have to reach $1,000 target within the first 30 days simply to keep this site active. So we really are hoping people will want to contribute and help us with this effort.
It's been hard, especially because the mainstream media, which Greg Palast has called the electronic Berlin Wall, has been, they know about us. A few of them who will remain unnamed have actually threatened us to quit talking about things that they don't want to talk about. And we're still talking about it. And in spite of no advertising and no help from the mainstream media, we're doing fine so far, but we need all the help we can get from citizens.
Yeah, this is a citizen's case, and we need citizen support.
That's right. So Mark, I want to thank you. And if you'd like to end with a sports analogy or a cute little funny movie reference to kind of end on a positive note, anything else you'd like to say about the Commander-in-Chief, which could be a great hashtag, by the way, Amy?
Yeah. Or anything related to bears.
Right. Or dogs, if you have a dog friend who doesn't want to be called a bear.
Well, I mean, I've got my cats, but
We
they're
can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
very left-wing and progressive. There's nothing I can say other than this. The conference is being held Monday. Our case is being heard in conference by the Supreme Court. We need people to be aware of it, and we need for the justices to advance that case out of conference. And the odds in that on any case are slim. But at the end of summer conference, as I wrote the other day, there are more cases that the court considers at that time. It's the end of summer when a whole bunch of cases have been there. And so we need people to be aware of that, and they can go to the revote2017.net website and see what they can do to help muster support for this. And anything that they can do.
Yeah, we got a lot of evidence on there. Thank you so much to both of you for all your time and energy, and have an awesome rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, wait, I got to show one more thing. My Revote 2017 button. Amy, you want to show yours? You're wearing
I
it or
left it
not?
upstairs, but go to revote2017.net to learn more about the case, because we've got
You
some
can order
fantastic
buttons.
resources there.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.